The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web that stretches from Coruscant spires to the tombs of Korriban. But war does not care for balance. The Great Galactic War had ground on for years, a slow bleeding contest between the Galactic Republic and the resurgent Sith Empire, fought world by world across the Outer Rim in a struggle neither side could declare finished. Into this stalemate, from a galaxy that had never heard of the Force, something arrived that owed allegiance to neither the light nor the dark, only to the mission, and to the armor that had never once failed him. No hyperspace beacon registered the intrusion. No astrogation chart accounted for it. The tear in space that deposited the wreckage of a UNSC frigate above the contested world of Nadium was not a hyperspace lane at all, but something older and stranger, a slip space rupture, torn open mid-transit and folded, however briefly, into the same dimensional fabric the Sith called the Force. For one instant, two galaxies touched. Then the rupture sealed itself, and the frigate's wreckage began its long fall toward the planet's surface, carrying with it a single survivor. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The escape pod hit atmosphere at a velocity that would have liquefied an unarmored body. Inside John 117 Master Chief, the last Spartan 2 most Republic databases would never have a designation for absorbed the deceleration in silence, Mjolnir's inertial dampeners screaming against forces they were never designed to survive. Around him, the pod's hull groaned and split, atmosphere howling through the breach. Cortana's voice cut through the chaos, calm in the way she always was when the numbers were bad. Chief, I'm reading catastrophic hull failure in 11 seconds. I don't have a clean read on the terrain below. Something's interfering with the scanners. Could be ionization from reentry. Could be something else. Copy, he said, and that was all. There was no time for more. The pod struck a forest of pale, crystalline trees at the edge of a Nadium lowland, shearing through trunks like a scythe before slamming into a ravine wall and coming to rest in a tangle of shattered metal and smoking foliage. For a long moment there was only silence, the kind that settles after violence, broken by the distant call of unfamiliar birds and the soft tick of cooling metal. Master Chief's HUD flickered, rebooted, flickered again. Vitals, nominal. Armor integrity, 78%, with a compromised shield generator on the left flank. He ran a systems check with the same unhurried thoroughness he brought to everything, then pushed himself up out of the wreckage and into unfiltered air for the first time in longer than he cared to calculate. The sky here was wrong. Two suns hung low over jagged mountains the color of rust, and the light they cast had a sharpness to it, a clarity that made the crystalline forest around him glitter like a field of knives. There was no readout for this place. No UNSC survey had ever charted these stars. Cortana's presence flickered against the inside of his mind, her avatar rendering in his HUD's peripheral display, arms crossed, expression tight with the particular focus she wore when a problem defied her. I don't have a location, she said. I don't have a location for the region, the system, or the galaxy, Chief. Best guess. And I want you to understand how much I hate saying this. We're not where we started. Not just distance. I'm reading structural anomalies in local spacetime that don't match any slip space model in my databases. There's an energy field permeating everything. Organic matter, the atmosphere, even the rock. It's faint, but it's everywhere, like the whole planet's holding a low current. Can you use it? I don't know what it is yet. Give me time. He gave her nothing, because there was no time to give. The forest ahead had gone quiet in a way that put old instincts on alert, and a moment later he understood why. Movement, low and fast, threading between the crystal trunks on both flanks. Not one patrol. Two. The first group wore mismatched armor plates over rugged flight suits, moving with the loose discipline of soldiers who had learned survival before drill, a Republic reconnaissance team, though Chief had no name for that yet. Rifles raised and eyes wide at the sight of a 7-foot armored figure rising out of a wreck pod that matched no known ship design. The second group came from the opposite trilling, and where the first group's caution read as uncertainty, this one's read as hunger. black and red armor, faces obscured behind masks vented for a climate far harsher than Nadium's. Weapons of a design chief's threat assessment routines couldn't classify Sith Empire troopers, though that designation, too, meant nothing to him yet. What mattered was posture, spacing, and intent, and both groups had already decided the wreckage was worth killing for. Chief did not move for either side. He raised no weapon, because his rifle had shattered somewhere in the fall, and his sidearm, though functional, would answer nothing about who these people were. Cortana's voice was tight in his ear. Chief, both groups are broadcasting encrypted chatter. I'm not decoding it in real time, but the tone's not friendly to us, and it's not friendly to each other either. I count 14 combatants. Crossfire geometry favors you holding the ravine. Copy, he said again, and settled his stance, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, not surrender, not aggression. The exact posture of a man who has survived contact situations by making the other side blink first. The officer leading the Republic team, a young human woman with a scar bisecting one eyebrow and a blaster rifle that shook only slightly in her grip, called out something in a language Chief's suit had no translation matrix for. He held perfectly still. Across the ravine, the black-armored trooper commanding the Sith patrol raised a fist, and his soldiers fanned into a firing line without a word spoken aloud. It was the crystal trees that saved the standoff from becoming a slaughter, or rather, it was what moved through them. A third presence, unhurried, indifferent to the tension crackling between the two patrols, stepped into the clearing from a direction neither group had been watching. Robed, hooded, moving with a stillness that made every soldier present flinch. Chief's threat assessment routines flagged the figure as the single greatest danger in the clearing, though he could not yet say why, only that something about the way the air seemed to bend faintly around the newcomer set every instinct he had ever trained into a state of readiness he hadn't felt since the worst days of the war he'd left behind. The hooded figure's head turned, slow and deliberate, until an unseen gaze settled on the wrecked pod and on the armored giant standing over it. A voice, dry and measured, carried across the clearing without seeming to need volume at all. Now that, the figure said, in words Chief's suit translated a half-second late, the delay itself a small, unsettling proof that something in this world did not answer to ordinary physics, is not a ship design I recognize. Cortana's voice dropped to a whisper only Chief could hear. Chief, that reading I mentioned, the current running through everything here, it just spiked, hard, and it's centered on him. Master Chief said nothing. He had walked into worse rooms with worse odds and come out the other side. And whatever this galaxy was, whatever strange currents ran beneath its skin, the calculus hadn't changed. Assess, adapt, survive. Both patrols had gone still, weapons wavering between the wreckage and the hooded stranger, uncertain now which threat mattered more. The Spartan shifted his weight fractionally, positioning himself between the frightened Republic scouts and the interloper whose presence had silenced two armies without a shot fired, and waited to see which way this new war would break. The hooded figure took 3 unhurried steps into the clearing, and the crystalline forest seemed to hold its breath around him. Neither patrol fired. That more than anything told Chief exactly how much authority radiated from beneath that hood. Soldiers on both sides of a live war, weapons raised at each other only seconds before, now standing frozen by a single unarmed man in robes. Lieutenant, the figure said, without turning his head toward the Republic officer, you may lower your weapons or you may keep them raised and discover how little that matters. Either way, you will not be firing them in the next 30 seconds. Then, to the black-armored trooper commander, Sergeant, recall your men to the ridge. This one is mine to assess. The dry authority in the voice brooked no argument, and Chief watched with clinical interest as both patrols obeyed, not out of loyalty, he judged, but out of something closer to conditioned dread. The Republic scouts backed toward the tree-line, rifles still trained, but no longer certain on what. The Sith troopers withdrew up the ravine slope in disciplined silence. Only the hooded man remained, closing the distance to the wreckage with a patience that felt, to Chief's threat assessment, more dangerous than any charge. Cortana, Chief said, subvocal, armor mic picking up nothing louder than breath. Options. Working on it. His vitals, if that's even the right word, aren't reading like anything biological I've cataloged. There's a field around him, Chief, and it's not radiation, it's not EM, it's not anything I have a category for. If I had to guess, and I hate guessing, I'd say it's connected to whatever's running through the rock and the trees. Just concentrated. In him. The man stopped a cautious 10 meters out, cautious not from fear, Chief judged, but from the calculated distance of someone gathering information before committing to a decision. Beneath the hood, sharp gray eyes took in the armor's proportions, the shattered pod, the alien geometry of Spartan design, with the unhurried thoroughness of a collector examining a rare specimen. You're not Republic, the man said. You're not Imperial either, and believe me, I would know. That armor doesn't match any Republic Special Forces contract, and it certainly doesn't match anything my Empire has fielded. So, what are you, and where did you fall from? Chief said nothing. Silence had served him in 100 first contact situations that had nothing to do with first contact in the interstellar sense. Silence forced the other party to reveal more than they intended, simply by filling the gap. The hooded man's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Not a talker. That's fine. I find I learn more from what a man does than what he says. He tilted his head, and for a moment the air around him seemed to thicken, a pressure building at the edge of perception that made even Chief's honed instincts flag danger. Let's see what you do, then. The attack came without warning, without wind-up, without any of the tells Chief's combat training had spent years drilling him to read. A sensation like a hand closing around his chest, not physical, not mechanical, simply there. And then his boots left the ground. Mjolnir's mass sensors screamed contradiction. Nothing had touched him. No force had been applied by any conventional means. And yet he was airborne, weightless, hurled backward into the ravine wall with a violence that would have shattered an unarmored spine. He hit rock and rolled with it, absorbing what he could, shields flaring amber across his HUD as they burned through a third of their capacity in a single impact. Cortana's voice spiked with alarm. Chief, that wasn't kinetic. There's no projectile signature, no directed energy discharge, nothing my sensors can isolate. He moved you with nothing. Chief was already moving, rolling to his feet before the ravine's echo had faded. And if there was a part of him that cataloged the impossibility of what had just happened, it was a small part, filed away for later processing. The immediate problem was in front of him, walking closer now with the unhurried confidence of a man who had learned exactly what he needed to know. Shields, the hooded man said, almost to himself, watching the amber flicker still crossing Chief's armor. Interesting. You absorbed that better than most Republic infantry would have. There's technology in that suit doing real work. He raised a hand, fingers curling, and this time Chief saw it coming. Not the mechanism, which remained invisible, but the telegraphing pressure in the air, the way loose stone and displaced dust began to lift and orbit the man's outstretched palm. Let's find its limits. Chief didn't wait for the second strike. He closed the distance at a dead sprint, Mjolnir's servos driving him across the ravine floor in under 2 seconds, and put every ounce of augmented strength into a blow aimed at the center of the man's chest. A strike that had ended fights against elites twice his mass. The Sith caught it. Not deflected, not dodged. Caught it, one gloved hand closing around Chief's fist with a grip that shouldn't have been physically possible. And for one suspended second the two of them stood locked, testing each other's strength in a contest that read on no sensor either of them possessed. Then the man exhaled a short, genuinely startled laugh and released the hold, stepping back with something that looked almost like respect. You're strong, he said. Strong enough that I felt that in my bones. And I don't say that about many things anymore. And you hit like you've done this before, recently and often. His gray eyes narrowed, calculation replacing curiosity. You're not just armor. You're a weapon the Republic didn't build and my Empire didn't design, which makes you either a very interesting problem or a very interesting opportunity. Neither, Chief said. His voice, filtered through the suit's vocoder, carried a flatness that had ended more negotiations than it had started. I don't know your war. I'm not part of it. Everyone who falls into this galaxy becomes part of it. Soldier. That's not a threat. That's just how wars work. They consume whatever's nearby that can hold a weapon. The man's posture shifted, the aggressive readiness bleeding out of it, replaced by something more contemplative. I am Darth Ronith of the Sith Empire's sphere of military offense. And you have just demonstrated in under a minute more raw physical capability than any organic soldier I've fought this decade. My empire has considerable interest in acquiring that capability. Alive and cooperative if possible. Cortana's voice was tight and urgent in Chief's ear. Chief, whatever he just did to you wasn't a weapon system. I've been trying to model it, and the closest thing I have is, it's like he moved you with willpower alone. That current I mentioned running through everything on this planet? He's not just near it. He's using it. Chief filed that away with the same discipline he applied to everything Cortana flagged as impossible. Not disbelief, simply prioritization. The immediate tactical picture mattered more than the metaphysics behind it. Ronith stood 10 meters out, hands loose at his sides now, but the pressure in the air hadn't fully dissipated. A coiled readiness that told Chief this conversation could become violence again in less time than it took to finish a sentence. I'm not interested in your empire, Chief said. Few are, until they understand what refusal costs. Ronith's tone remained conversational, almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. But I am not without patience, and I suspect a direct order to seize you would cost me more men than it's currently worth, given what I just watched you do to my sergeant's expectations. So, a different offer. Come with me. See what the Empire can provide a soldier of your caliber. Resources, purpose, a war worth fighting, instead of whatever scraps the Republic will offer a stray they can't classify. You need not commit to anything beyond a conversation. Behind Ronith, up along the ravine's ridge, Chief caught motion at the treeline. The Republic scouts had not withdrawn as far as ordered, the young lieutenant with the scarred eyebrow watching the standoff with an expression caught between fear and calculation. Her rifle no longer raised, but not lowered either. Two factions, both now aware that something had fallen into their contested territory capable of matching a man who moved stone with a gesture. Both, he judged, would want to own that fact before the day was through. I make my own conversations, Chief said. Not yours. Not theirs. He tilted his head fractionally toward the distant Republic position, making certain both parties understood the statement extended to them as well. You want to know what I am. I don't know what you are either. That makes us even. I'm not walking into anyone's war blind. Something in Ronith's expression sharpened. Not anger, Chief judged, but interest of a colder, more dangerous variety. The look of a man recalculating an equation he'd been confident he already understood. A soldier who serves no banner, Ronith said slowly. In my empire, we have a word for that. We call them dangerous, right up until the moment we call them dead. He inclined his head, a gesture that carried both mockery and genuine acknowledgement. But I find myself curious rather than eager to test that today. You have 3 days, stray. Nadium surface will not stay contested for much longer. My forces are moving to secure it, and the Republic will not simply cede the ground. When the fighting resumes in earnest, neutrality becomes a luxury even beings like you cannot afford. Choose a side, or the galaxy will choose one for you. He turned, robes settling into stillness, and began walking back toward the ridge where his troopers waited. 3 steps out, he paused, not looking back. For what it's worth, I hope you choose mine. It would be a waste, watching something like you get ground down fighting, for people who'll never understand what you actually are. Then he was gone, moving up the slope with his patrol falling into formation around him, and the pressure in the air went with him, leaving only the ordinary hush of an alien forest and the distant, uncertain watch of Republic scouts who had not yet decided whether to advance or retreat. Chief stood over the wreckage of his pod in the settling quiet, running a full diagnostic on shields that had burned through a third of their reserve against an enemy who had never fired a shot. Cortana's avatar flickered back into full focus in his HUD display, her expression grim and thoughtful in equal measure. Chief, she said, I don't like admitting I'm out of my depth. But whatever that was, it's not technology, and it's not going away. And if that's the baseline for this galaxy's war, we need answers before we need allies. She paused, watching the readouts scroll past on power that field had cost him. I don't think Nadium's staying quiet long enough for us to find them slowly. Above the ravine, the twin suns hung low and sharp, and somewhere beyond the ridgeline, the machinery of a war between empires was already grinding back into motion. The Republic scouts had not retreated far. Chief found their position without difficulty, a shallow depression a half-kilometer up the ravine, screened by a stand of the pale crystal trees, close enough that the young lieutenant with a scarred eyebrow must have watched the entire exchange with Ronith from cover. Smart, he judged. Cautious, but not cowardly. She'd kept her people alive by not committing them to a fight they couldn't win, and she hadn't run the moment the danger passed either. He approached in the open, no attempt at concealment, hands visible, the same posture that had bought him 30 seconds of consideration back at the wreckage. It bought him the same here. Rifles came up and stayed up, but no one fired, and that told him as much about Republic discipline as anything Ronith's Sith troopers had shown about theirs. That's close enough, the lieutenant called, her basic rendering clean through his suit's now adapting translation matrix. Cortana had spent the last 20 minutes building a working model off the fragments captured during the standoff, and the results, while imperfect, were serviceable. You want to explain what you are, and why a Sith Lord just tried to recruit you like a business proposition instead of executing you like Imperial protocol usually goes? No, Chief said. The bluntness caught her off guard. He watched it land, saw the brief recalibration behind her eyes. That's not the answer I expected. You asked what I'd explain. Nothing right now. You want information. You'll get it when it's useful to both of us, not because you pointed a rifle at me. He let a beat pass, watching her weigh that against the very real fact that she had 6 soldiers and he had, as far as she'd witnessed, absorbed a Sith Lord's attack and remained standing. I'm not your enemy. I'm not your ally either. Not yet. Behind her, an older soldier, sergeant's markings, Chief judged, though the insignia meant nothing yet without Cortana's still forming context, muttered something that needed no translation to read as skepticism. The lieutenant ignored him, studying Chief with the particular intensity of an officer trying to decide whether an unknown variable was a resource or a liability. Lieutenant Vesicor, she said finally. Republic Strategic Information Service, attached to the Nadium reconnaissance element. And you just made an enemy of a Sith sphere commander by refusing him to his face, which either makes you the bravest thing I've seen this campaign or the stupidest. I haven't decided which. Both sometimes, Chief said. It was as close to humor as he offered anyone, and Cortana's avatar, visible only to him, arched an eyebrow at the rare occurrence. Kor's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, before discipline reasserted itself. Ronith doesn't make offers like that unless he sees something worth the Empire's investment. And he doesn't threaten deadlines unless he means to enforce them. Nadium's about to become a war zone in truth, not just skirmish territory. Republic Third Fleet is inbound to contest Imperial supply lines running through the system. And when that happens, every scrap of high ground on this planet becomes tactically relevant, including apparently you. I'm not tactically relevant to your fleet. You floored a Sith Lord's opening gambit and walked away standing. Trust me, soldier, whatever you call yourself, you're relevant. She lowered her rifle at last, a decision made rather than a reflex relaxing, and gestured her squad to do the same. I can't order you to come with us. I don't have the authority, and frankly, I don't think I have the firepower to make you if you refused. But I can offer you something Ronith can't, because my government isn't in the business of pretending recruitment and slavery are the same conversation held in different tones. What? Answers. My analyst back at the forward base has spent 6 months cataloging every anomalous signature crossing into Republic sensor range in this sector. If something fell into our galaxy from wherever you're from, we may have data that helps you understand what happened to you, and maybe how to reverse it, if that's what you want. She held his gaze, steady despite the disparity in their positions. That's the offer. No enlistment forms. No oaths. Just information, and the chance to figure out what you're actually dealing with before you make any decisions you can't walk back. Cortana's voice dropped into Chief's ear, subvocal and private. Chief, that's the smarter play right now. We don't know enough. Ranatha's empire wants you as a weapon. That much was obvious inside 60 seconds. This lieutenant is at least offering information without a leash attached. I take the data. Doesn't mean we take a side. He weighed it the way he weighed every operational decision, not on comfort, not on inclination, but on what advanced the actual objective, which at this moment was singular and unambiguous. Understand the terrain, then find a way home, or find a way to survive the terrain if home wasn't reachable. Intelligence served both. I'll look at your data, Chief said. That's not an alliance. Understood. Kor didn't push further, didn't try to dress the arrangement up as more than it was, and Chief filed that restraint as a point in her favor. She turned, signaling her squad to fall in, then paused, glancing back at the wreckage, still smoking faintly in the ravine behind them. For what it's worth, whatever you flew in on, it's not salvageable. My tech sergeant took one look and called it a write-off. If you're hoping to fix your way home, that ship's not the answer. I know, Chief said, and something in his flat tone made her study him a moment longer before turning away. The Republic forward base occupied a fortified ridge 2 hours hike from the crash site, a cluster of prefabricated shelters and communications arrays ringed by defensive emplacements that Chief assessed, with professional interest, as adequate against conventional assault and almost certainly inadequate against whatever Ronath had demonstrated in the ravine. He kept that observation to himself. It wasn't his war to fortify. The analyst corps had promised turned out to be a Twi'lek woman named Dessa Orn, whose cramped quarters inside the command shelter were papered, in the physical sense, actual flimsiplas sheets pinned to every available surface, with sensor logs, star charts, and hand-annotated theories about the anomalous readings that had been accumulating across the sector for months. She looked up as Chief ducked through the shelter's low entrance, and her first reaction was not fear, but something closer to delight. The expression of a researcher, presented with the exact specimen her research had predicted. "You're real," she said, circling him with a datapad already scanning. "I mean, obviously you're real, you're standing in my office, but I mean you're real in the sense that the readings weren't sensor drift. Do you have any idea how many people told me the spatial distortions I flagged were just gravitic echoes off Nadium's asteroid belt?" "Oh, Hearn," Kor said, a warning edge in her voice. Professional distance. "Right. Sorry." Orn didn't sound sorry. She gestured Chief toward a cleared section of table, datapad still scanning. 6 months ago, long-range Republic sensors across this sector started picking up brief spatial anomalies, tiers, essentially, opening and closing across dozens of systems, none lasting more than a few seconds, none with any consistent point of origin. Command wrote them off as hyperspace lane instability, background noise from the war's disruption of established routes. I didn't buy it. The energy signatures didn't match anything hyperspace-related. They matched something else. "What?" Chief said. O'Hearn's expression sobered, the enthusiasm giving way to something more careful. "There's a theory fringe, mostly dismissed by the Jedi Order's own scholars, which tells you something about how seriously it's taken, that the galaxy isn't alone, that there are other realities, other dimensions, separated from ours by walls that are usually absolute, except in places where something's already worn them thin. War does that, sometimes. Enough violence, enough death, enough desperate use of the Force in one place over enough time, and the walls get thin enough for something to slip through." She looked at him directly. Nadium's seen 3 major battles in the last 2 years. If something was going to tear through here, this is exactly the kind of place it would happen. Cortana's voice was quiet in Chief's ear, and for once carried none of her usual dry precision, only genuine unease. "Chief, if she's right, that's not a malfunction we can engineer our way out of. That's not a slip-space calculation error. That's a fundamentally different category of problem." "Can be reversed?" Chief asked Orn. "I don't know. Nobody's ever documented it happening in reverse, mostly because nobody's ever documented it happening at all with a survivor to study afterward. You're the first confirmed case I have real data on." She hesitated, weighing what came next with visible reluctance. "There's one place that might have answers. Not Republic, not Imperial either, genuinely neutral, which in this war is rarer than you'd think. A scholar collective operating out of NAR Shada. Independent researchers who study force anomalies without an agenda attached to either side of the war. If anyone in this galaxy has documented something like your arrival, it's them. Kor's jaw tightened at the mention, and Chief noted the reaction without comment. Nar Shadow's hot space, she said. Neutral in name. In practice, it's a den of smugglers, bounty hunters, and information brokers who'll sell you to the highest bidder along with the intelligence you came for. I can't guarantee your safety there, and I certainly can't order Republic resources to escort you into Hutt cartel territory in the middle of an active military campaign. I didn't ask for an escort, Chief said. He turned the two offers over with the same discipline he brought to every mission parameter. Ronatha's promise of resources and purpose, wrapped around an unmistakable leash. Kor's promise of information, honest in its limits, but bounded entirely by what Republic Command was willing to sanction. And now a third path, unaffiliated, uncertain, and dangerous in a different register than either army's weapons. It was a kind of choice that had no clean tactical answer, only a judgment call about which danger he could navigate on his own terms. Cortana, he said, subvocal. Once Oren had returned to her charts and Kor had stepped away to relay a status report. Assessment. Honestly, I don't love any of these options. But the Scholar Collective is the only one that isn't trying to own you first and inform you second. If we're going to understand what happened and whether we can get home, that's the lead worth chasing. A pause. And when she spoke again, there was something almost rueful in her tone. Also, for the record, I've cross-referenced everything Oren just told us against what I felt during your fight with Ronath. Whatever this force is, it's not magic in the sense my threat models want to file it as. It's closer to a field, an energy state some of the local population can perceive and manipulate. That's a variable we can eventually model, Chief. It's just going to take time we may not have. Outside the shelter, distant and low, the first tremor of orbital bombardment rolled across the ridge. Not close, not yet, but close enough that every soldier in the base went still for half a second, counting seconds until it either repeated or didn't. It didn't not immediately, but the message was clear enough, without translation. Ronatha's 3-day deadline had just started counting down in earnest, and somewhere above Nadium's twin suns, the opening moves of a much larger battle were already underway. The bombardment did not repeat in the hours that followed, but its echo lingered in the base's rhythm. Comm chatter tightened, patrols doubled, and Lieutenant Kor disappeared into a series of terse briefings that left her jaw set harder each time she emerged. Chief used the lull the way he used every lull, preparing. Cortana had spent the intervening hours running diagnostics on the shield generator Ronatha's unseen strike had burned through, and her assessment, delivered with clinical bluntness, was not encouraging. The generator itself is fine, she said, her avatar overlaying a wireframe schematic across Chief's HUD. It's the recharge curve that's the problem. Whatever hit us wasn't kinetic, wasn't thermal, wasn't anything the shield's threat response algorithms were built to categorize efficiently. It treated the impact like an unknown type event and defaulted to a conservative recovery cycle, which means next time something like that happens, we'll be slower to come back online than we should be. I can retune it, but I need more data points. One fight isn't enough to build a reliable model. Then we get more data points, Chief said, somewhere that isn't a Sith Lord's opening move. Fair point. Oren found him as he finished checking his sidearms charge, the one working weapon that had survived the crash intact, and a poor substitute for the rifle he'd lost, but functional. She carried a data slate loaded with what she called everything short of a formal introduction letter, a set of coordinates and contact protocols for the Nar Shada Scholar Collective, along with a warning that came with none of her earlier enthusiasm attached. Getting there is the easy part, she said. There's a Republic supply convoy running a corridor through the Hutt-controlled approach lanes twice a cycle. Smugglers, technically, but ones the Republic pays well enough to look the other way about cargo manifests. I can get you a berth on the next run. Getting in once you're on Nar Shada proper. That's where it gets complicated. The collective doesn't advertise. They vet visitors before they'll even confirm they exist. And that armor of yours, she gestured at him with the data slate, not unkindly. It's not exactly inconspicuous. Every scrap dealer, tech broker, and bounty hunter on that moon is going to clock you as either the most valuable salvage haul of the decade or the most dangerous mark they've ever seen. Possibly both, possibly at the same time. I've been conspicuous before. Not like this. O'Hearn's tone sharpened with genuine concern. Chief, that's what Core's been calling you. I heard. The readings coming off your equipment aren't just unusual, they're broadcast. Every scan-capable ship that passes near you is going to flag anomalous energy signatures. Ronith already knows you exist. It won't take Imperial intelligence long to put together that something valuable is moving through this sector, and NAR Shadda's crawling with informants who sell information to the highest bidder regardless of which uniform's paying. Cortana's voice was dry in his ear. She's not wrong, Chief. I've been trying to dampen our signature since the crash, and I'm having limited success. Whatever the technology in this armor is built from, it doesn't play well with attempts to go quiet in a galaxy this saturated with ambient force energy. We're loud whether we like it or not. He absorbed both warnings the way he absorbed all operational risk, as a fixed variable to plan around rather than a reason to change the objective. Understood. When's the convoy? 6 hours. O'Hearn hesitated, then added quieter, for what it's worth. I hope you find your way home. Or find something worth staying for, if you don't. Either way, I'd rather you walked out of this war than got ground up by it. The convoy was smaller than Chief expected. 3 freighters running dark, transponders scrubbed, moving in a loose formation designed to read as debris on casual scan. He rode the middle vessel, a converted bulk hauler called the Long Odds, in a cargo hold stacked with crates of medical supplies bound, officially, for a Republic-aligned world 3 jumps distant. The captain, a weathered Rodian named Vashk, who asked no questions Chief didn't volunteer answers to, had clearly done this exact kind of unofficial passenger smuggling before, and clearly intended to keep his curiosity professionally suppressed for the duration. It was mid-transit, somewhere in the gap between systems, that the trouble found them anyway. Chief, Cortana's voice cut through his half-meditative systems, check with an urgency that had him moving before she'd finished the sentence. 2 ships just dropped out of hyperspace on an intercept vector. Configuration doesn't match Republic or Imperial military. These read as independent, heavily modified, and they're broadcasting a targeting lock on the Long Odds specifically, not the convoy as a whole. Whoever they are, they know exactly which ship you're on. The hold's intercom crackled with Vashk's voice, considerably less composed than his earlier professional comm. We got bounty hunters incoming, and they're not interested in my medical crates. Whoever's paying them wants whatever's riding in my cargo hold, and I did not sign up to die over cargo I don't understand. Chief was already moving toward the hold's boarding ramp, mind running through the narrow set of options available inside a freighter with no weapon systems worth the name. How many? 2 ships, and I'm reading boarding pods launching from both, Cortana reported. Chief, this is fast. Someone already had a fix on this convoy before it left orbit. That's not opportunism, that's a leak. Ronith. Maybe. Or someone's selling information to whoever pays best. Either way, we've got company in under 90 seconds. The first boarding pod struck the Long Odds outer hull with a shriek of tearing metal, cutting equipment already screaming through the plating before the pod had fully settled. Chief planted himself at the junction between the cargo hold and the ship's narrow central corridor, the only approach a boarding party could take without cutting through reinforced bulkheads, and waited with the stillness of a man who had done exactly this 1,000 times before in 100 different corridors, against 100 different kinds of enemy. The bounty hunters who breached through were a mixed crew, a heavily armored Weequay wielding a vibroaxe, 2 humans in mismatched combat gear carrying blaster carbines, and a 4th figure whose lean, deliberate movements and exposed cybernetic components marked her as something more dangerous than the muscle flanking her. She was the one who spoke first, her voice carrying the particular confidence of someone who had done her research. UNSC hardware, she said, studying Chief with open appraisal. Didn't believe the tip when it came in. Figured it was a scam, some info broker padding a contract with a fantasy readout. But here you are. She raised a hand, and her companions leveled their weapons without further preamble. Nothing personal, big man. Someone's offering more credits for you alive than I've made in the last 2 years combined. Come quiet, and everyone on this ship gets to keep breathing. Cortana, Chief said, subvocal, already calculating angles in the narrow corridor. Options. Corridors, a bottleneck. Good for us, bad for them, if you use it right. 4 hostiles. Confirmed cybernetics on the one who's talking, which means she's probably augmented for combat reflexes. I'd prioritize her first if this goes loud. A pause. Calculation compressing into a fraction of a second. Chief, she said someone's paying for you alive. That tells us something. If this was Ronatha's play, dead would probably work just as well for whatever he wants to study. A live-only bounty means whoever's paying wants to use you specifically. The bounty hunter's patience, already thin, ran out. Last chance, big man. Hands up, or we start with the leg and work our way to cooperative. Chief didn't raise his hands. He dropped low and drove forward into the bottleneck instead, closing the gap before the first shot could track him. And the corridor of the long odds erupted into violence that would decide, in the next 90 seconds, exactly how expensive this galaxy's opening bid for his cooperation was going to be. The corridor's narrowness, which the bounty hunters had counted as an advantage, became their undoing the moment Chief closed the distance. He drove a shoulder into the lead human before the man's carbine could track center mass, the impact folding him against the bulkhead with a crack of composite armor and bone that put him out of the fight before he'd fired a shot. The vibroaxe came next, the weak way swinging with a strength that would have cleaved lesser armor. But Chief caught the haft mid-arc, twisted, and used the mercenary's own momentum to send him crashing into his remaining companion, both bodies tangling in the corridor's confined space. That left the augmented woman, and she had not wasted the 2 seconds his opening moves had cost her. She'd already closed to melee range, cybernetic reflexes compensating for the loss of her firing lane, twin vibroblades snapping free from forearm housings with a whine of charging edges. Her first strike came fast enough that Chiefs had flagged it as approaching Spartan augmented reaction thresholds, not equal, but close enough to demand real attention rather than casual defense. Not bad, she said, blade skittering off his gauntlet in a shower of sparks, her voice carrying genuine surprise beneath the combat focus. Whoever sold that tip undersold you. Cortana, Chief said, subvocal, blocking a second strike aimed at the shield generator's compromised flank. She'd clearly studied combat footage or received intelligence, precise enough to know exactly where his defenses ran thin. She's targeting the weak point specifically. I see it. That's not luck, Chief, that's a briefing. Someone gave her actual data on your systems, which means whoever's bankrolling this bounty had eyes on the Nadium engagement. Cortana's voice tightened with the particular urgency of a variable shifting mid-calculation. Watch the third strike. Augmented fighters, like her, usually chain a feint into a real opening. She's setting one up now. The feint came exactly as predicted. A blade sweeping high toward his helmet that pulled his guard up a half second before her actual attack drove low, aimed at the same compromised shield flank Ronatha's force strike had already burned through once. Chief read at a heartbeat before impact, not fast enough to avoid it cleanly, but fast enough to turn a killing strike into a survivable one, catching her wrist and redirecting the blade's edge along his armors, plating instead of through the seam it had been aimed at. Sparks scattered across the corridor. His shields, already thin from Ronatha's earlier assault, flared and dropped to critical. Shield down, Cortana reported, flat and precise even under pressure. You're running on plating alone now, Chief. He didn't need the reminder. He used the opening her failed strike had cost her, off balance for half a second, weight committed to a blow that hadn't landed clean, and drove a fist into her side with enough force to crack the cybernetic housing along her ribs. She staggered, blades dropping from a suddenly unresponsive hand, and Chief followed with a strike that ended the engagement decisively, leaving her slumped against the bulkhead, breathing but no longer combat capable. The corridor went quiet except for the groans of the 2 mercenaries tangled at its far end and the ragged breathing of the woman he'd just put down. Chief straightened, running a full systems check, while his HUD painted the aftermath in clinical red and amber. Shields critical, plating integrity down to 60%, a hairline stress fracture across the left pauldron that Cortana flagged as needing field repair before any further engagement. Chief. Vashk's voice crackled over the intercom, thin with adrenaline. Please tell me that's the last of them, because I did not budget for a firefight in my flight plan. It's handled, Chief said. He crouched beside the augmented bounty hunter, who watched him through pain-narrowed eyes with the wary calculation of someone assessing whether cooperation or defiance offered better odds of survival. Who's paying? She laughed, a short, pained sound. You think I'm stupid enough to answer that for free? Even half dead? I think you're smart enough to know dying for someone else's contract is a bad trade. Chief's voice carried no threat, only flat statement of fact, which somehow made the words land harder than a raised weapon would have. I'm not going to kill you. I want a name. She studied him for a long moment, weighing something Chief couldn't read behind the calculation in her eyes, before she exhaled and gave up the fight along with the information. Don't know a name. Contract came through an anonymous broker relay, credits up front, bounty specs detailed enough that whoever wrote them had actual intelligence on you. Combat capability, armor weak points, approximate strength thresholds. That's not cheap information, and it's not something a random broker generates on their own. Whoever wants you, they've got resources and they've got patience. This was just the opening bid. If we couldn't take you, there'll be a second wave with better information and better hardware. Cortana's voice was quiet and grim in Chief's ear. That tracks with what I flagged earlier, Chief. Someone's building a profile on us in real time. Could be Ronatha's Sith intelligence apparatus, could be an independent broker selling data to the highest bidder. But either way, we're not just conspicuous anymore. We're being hunted systematically. And that bounty spec means someone got close enough to gather real combat data. That's concerning on its own. It means someone was watching the Nadium clearing. Chief straightened, leaving the mercenary alive but disarmed, and moved back toward the cargo hold where Vashk waited, pale and unsteady, but otherwise unharmed. The Radian captain took one look at the wreckage of his corridor and the three unconscious or incapacitated bounty hunters, and made a sound that was half relief, half despair at the state of his ship. I am never doing this run again, Vashk muttered, surveying scorched bulkheads and a dented hull plate. Whatever the Republic's paying me, it is not enough for this. I want that on record. Noted, Chief said. They reached NAR Shada without further incident, the long odds limping into a designated smuggler's berth in one of the moon's countless vertical docking stacks. Atmosphere thick with a haze of industrial exhaust and the ceaseless neon glow that seemed to pass for daylight in this stratum of the Ecumenopolis. Chief had seen dense urban environments before, high-value targets in sprawling city battles that made careful movement a matter of survival. But nothing in his combat experience had prepared him for the sheer vertical chaos of Hutt Space's most notorious moon, a city built on top of itself in layers that seemed to stretch upward and downward without visible end. O'Hearn's coordinates led through 3 transit levels and a maze of market corridors thick with 100 species Chief had no reference for, every one of them giving his armor a second, longer look than casual traffic warranted. Cortana kept a running tally of scan attempts pinging off his suit's exterior sensors. Dozens within the first hour alone, a mix of curious civilians, opportunistic scrap dealers, and at least 2 she flagged as professional-grade surveillance signatures, the kind that suggested someone with resources was already tracking his movement through the Undercity. We're not exactly blending in, Cortana observed dryly, as a trio of loitering figures at a market stall's edge went suspiciously still at his approach, then dispersed with the deliberate casualness of people who'd just confirmed a tip to someone waiting on the other end of a comm channel. I know. The Scala Collective's listed address, when they finally reached it, was unremarkable by design, a nondescript storefront wedged between a droid repair shop and a cantina whose patrons eyed Chief's passing silhouette with a wariness that suggested word of the bounty had already begun circulating through the Undercity's information networks, faster than he'd hoped to outrun it. He had perhaps hours, not days, before the mercenary crew's failure prompted whoever was paying to send something harder to put down. He knocked. The door remained closed for a long moment, and Cortana flagged the faint hum of active scanning sweeping across his armor from concealed sensors he couldn't visually locate. Then, with a soft mechanical release, the door slid open, revealing a dim interior lined with data terminals and star charts, and a lone figure waiting just inside, an elderly Zabrak woman whose weathered face carried the particular stillness of someone who had spent a lifetime studying things most of the galaxy preferred not to look at directly. "You're the anomaly from Nadium," she said, not a question. "Word travels fast when a bounty this large gets posted. Come in quickly, soldier. The collective doesn't have much time before whoever's hunting you finds this address too, and I'd rather not have that conversation with weapons drawn." The interior of the Scholar Collective storefront was larger than its facade suggested, a warren of connected chambers extending back into the building's depths, each one lined with data terminals. Star charts marked in annotations Chief's translation matrix struggled to keep pace with, and shelving stacked with artifacts that range from mundane to visibly, almost aggressively strange. The Zabrak woman who'd let him in moved with the unhurried confidence of someone on familiar ground, gesturing him deeper into the space while a pair of younger researchers, a human man and a Mon Calamari woman, both absorbed in their own terminal work, glanced up only briefly before returning to whatever calculations occupied them. "Master Vess," the woman said, by way of introduction, "I lead this collective for whatever leadership means among people who mostly refuse to be led. You'll forgive the caution. We've survived this long precisely by not advertising. And a bounty this size, this fast, tells me our discretion's about to be tested harder than usual." "You know about the bounty," Chief said. "Everyone on this level of NAR Shada knows about the bounty. Word like that moves faster than a hyperspace jump in a city built on selling secrets." Vess settled into a worn chair beside the largest of the star charts, gesturing him toward a seat he didn't take. "I'm more interested in what generated it. Dessa Owen's message reached us 6 hours before you did. She has a habit of sending warnings ahead of her recommendations, which I appreciate more than she probably realizes. She believes you're a dimensional anomaly. I'd like to know if she's right before I decide how much of our resources this conversation is worth." Cortana's voice was quiet in Chief's ear. Straightforward. "I like her already. Give her enough to keep this productive. Chief, we need what she has." "I'm not from this galaxy," Chief said. "My ship went through something that wasn't hyperspace. I don't know what your force is, but whatever tore the hole I came through, it seems to run on it." Vessa's weathered features sharpened with focused interest, and she exchanged a glance with a human researcher, who had abandoned his terminal entirely now to listen. "That matches the pattern," she said, almost to herself, before addressing Chief directly. "We've documented 41 confirmed dimensional bleed events across the last 3 decades, all of them clustered around sites of extreme force disturbance, major battles, most of them, places where enough death and desperate power use in a short span of time, where's the boundary between realities thin enough to tear. Most bleeds are brief, a flicker, gone before anything can pass through. You are, as far as our records show, only the second documented case of something crossing over intact and surviving." "The second," Chief said. "What was the first?" Vessa's expression clouded, the academic enthusiasm giving way to something more guarded. "A being who arrived roughly 11 years ago, near the tail end of what your records would have no context for, but which we designate the Dragulch incident. Different physiology, different abilities. Not a soldier like you, near as we could reconstruct, but something considerably more dangerous. It did not integrate peacefully. It did not integrate at all, really. It burned through 3 star systems before Republic and Imperial forces set aside their war long enough to jointly put it down, at a cost neither side has ever fully declassified." She let that settle before continuing. "I tell you this not to frighten you, soldier, but because I suspect it explains part of why a bounty this size and this well-informed materialized within a day of your arrival. Both Republic and Imperial intelligence remember what happened last time something crossed over. Neither wants to repeat it. Both would very much like to control the variable this time, rather than clean up after it." Cortana's tone in Chief's ear had gone carefully neutral. The register she used when a variable had just become significantly more complicated. "That reframes the bounty, Chief. This isn't just opportunism or Ronith extending his reach. If both governments have institutional memory of a previous crossover going catastrophically wrong, then whoever's hunting you might not just want you captured. They might see you as a threat that needs neutralizing before it becomes the next Drag Gulch incident. Alive only might just mean they want to study the threat before deciding how to handle it. I'm not that, Chief said, to Vess, flat and certain. I believe you, Vess said, and something in her tone suggested she meant it, though the caution in her posture didn't fully ease. The being from Drag Gulch showed no discipline, no restraint, no capacity for the kind of judgment you've demonstrated simply by walking into my collective storefront instead of taking whatever you wanted by force, which, given what I understand of your capabilities from Oren's message, you likely could have. That distinction matters. But it won't matter to whoever posted that bounty. And it certainly won't matter to Darth Ronith if he decides the safest course is to eliminate the variable rather than recruit it. She rose, moving toward one of the deeper chambers, beckoning him to follow. Come. If you want to understand what happened to you, and whether it can be reversed, I have something you need to see. Whether it's good news or bad news, I genuinely don't know yet. The chamber she led him into was smaller, more secure, a single reinforced door, its lock cycling through what Cortana identified as genuinely sophisticated encryption, opening onto a room dominated by a single containment case. Inside, suspended in a stasis field, sat a fragment of metal no larger than a fist, its surface scarred and pitted in a way that reminded Chief, with a jolt of recognition, his HUD flagged as significant, of UNSC hull alloy after atmospheric re-entry stress. We recovered this from a Drag Gulch incident site 8 years ago, Vess said. Debris. Not organic, not force-active in any way our instruments could measure, but anomalous in composition. Metallurgy that matches nothing cataloged anywhere in this galaxy's manufacturing databases. She gestured at the case. I'd wager your onboard systems will recognize it faster than my instruments ever could. Cortana's scan completed in less than a second, and her voice, when it came, carried a weight Chief hadn't heard from her since the crash. Chief, that's titanium A battle plate, UNSC grade. I'm reading manufacturing tolerances consistent with a Pelican dropship hull fragment. A pause, longer than her processing speed should have required. The kind of pause that meant she was choosing words carefully. Whatever came through 11 years ago, in your galaxy's frame of reference, it might have come from our side. Not an alien threat, Chief. Possibly one of ours. The implication settled over him with the particular weight of a variable that changed everything downstream of it. Vess watched his stillness with the patient attention of someone who had learned to read reactions carefully in her line of work, waiting for him to process before she continued. If your onboard intelligence recognizes that material, she said slowly, then I suspect we both just learned something neither of us was prepared for. Whatever tore that hole between our realities didn't just happen once, and didn't just happen to you. And if the first crossing ended the way ours did, 3 burn systems, and a body count neither government will discuss, then you should understand precisely why a bounty for your capture materialized this fast, this well-funded, and this discreetly. She met his eyes, or the closest approximation his visor allowed. The question you need to answer isn't just how to get home, soldier. It's whether anyone in this galaxy will let you try, before they decide it's safer to make sure you never get the chance. The stasis case's soft blue glow filled the silence that followed, and Chief studied the fragment of titanium A, plating with the particular stillness of a man recalculating an entire operational framework in real time. Cortana's presence in his HUD had gone unusually quiet, her avatar processing rather than speaking, and when she finally broke the silence, her voice carried none of its usual dry precision. Chief, I want to be careful about what conclusions we draw here. One fragment isn't proof of a UNSC vessel making a full crossing. It could be debris carried through incidentally, attached to something else, caught in the same rupture without a crew surviving the transit. But the alloy match is too precise to be coincidence. Someone or something from our side of the boundary has been here before. And if Vess's account of the Drag Gulch incident is accurate, whatever came through didn't come through controlled. Or it lost control after arrival, Chief said. Same as anything dropped into unfamiliar terrain, without support. Vess, watching the exchange with the attentiveness of someone accustomed to reading half a conversation and inferring the rest, folded her hands. That is, in fact, the working theory several of my colleagues favor. Whatever crossed over during the Drag Gulch incident may not have arrived hostile. It may have arrived lost, disoriented, and afraid in a galaxy with no context for what it was. And the first beings to encounter it responded the way frightened, war-hardened populations usually respond to something they don't understand. With violence. What followed may have been retaliation, not invasion. She let that settle before continuing. I raise this not to excuse 3 burn systems, but because I suspect you understand better than most exactly how quickly first contact curdles into catastrophe when neither side extends patience to the other. Chief said nothing, but Cortana's silence in his ear carried its own weight, the two of them processing the same uncomfortable parallel. A Sith Lord's opening gambit in a ravine, a bounty posted within a day, mercenaries briefed with combat data gathered before he'd said a single word to explain himself. This galaxy had not extended in patience either. It had simply, so far, not yet escalated to the scale of the Drag Gulch incident, and Chief understood with clinical clarity that the margin between those two outcomes was thinner than he'd like. Can this be reversed? Chief said. The crossing. Is there a way back? Vessa's expression turned careful in a way that told him the answer before she spoke it. We don't know. No one has ever documented a successful return crossing, not because it's proven impossible, but because it's never been attempted under controlled conditions. Every bleed event we've cataloged was chaotic, unpredictable, tied to massive expenditures of force energy during moments of extreme violence. We have theories about replicating the conditions artificially, but they're theories built on 41 data points collected from a distance, none of them from a crossing we caused deliberately. She met his eyes. I won't lie to you and call this simple. If a path home exists, it likely requires exactly the kind of force event that got you here in the first place, concentrated, violent, and dangerous to be anywhere near. That's not comforting, I know. Not looking for comfortable, Chief said. Looking for accurate. Something in that answer seemed to settle a question Vess had been quietly weighing since he'd walked in, because her posture eased fractionally, the wariness of a stranger giving way to something closer, to genuine collaboration. Then accurate is this. My collective has spent years trying to identify a location and a method to test the theory safely. We've never had the resources, the security, or, frankly, a subject with direct experience of a crossing to validate our models against. You are, potentially, the single most valuable research opportunity this collective has ever had access to. She paused, weighing her next words with visible care. I won't pretend that isn't self-interested, but I'd rather be honest about my motives than pretend I'm offering you charity. Cortana's voice was low and thoughtful. I appreciate her candor, Chief. That's rarer in this galaxy than I expected. But she's also just told us, in plain terms, that going home isn't a quick fix. It's a research project, and an uncertain one. We need to think about what we do in the meantime, because Ronatha's deadline doesn't care about research timelines, and neither does whoever posted that bounty. Before Chief could respond, the chamber's outer door chimed. Not the visitor's signal Vess had used to admit him, but something sharper, more urgent, and the two younger researchers in the outer room went instantly tense at the sound. Vess's head turned toward the noise, her earlier composure fracturing into something closer to alarm. That's the perimeter alert, she said. Someone's attempting to breach the outer scanning field. We don't get that signal from casual traffic. That means someone with real capability just tried to force a read on this location, and failed to do it quietly. She moved toward the chamber's terminal, fingers flying across the interface, and the star chart display flickered into a tactical overlay Chief recognized instantly for what it was. Sensor contacts, converging on the collective's position from 3 directions. Ships, Vess said, voice tightening. Small craft, military-grade sensor signatures, converging on this block. 3, no, for separate contacts. She looked up at Chief, and the calculation in her eyes had shifted entirely, from academic curiosity to the sharp, practical fear of someone who understood exactly what those contacts meant for her collective's carefully guarded anonymity. I don't think this is Ronatha's empire, soldier. Imperial intelligence doesn't announce itself with this many contacts at once. It's not subtle enough for them, not on a first approach. This reads like someone with resources, patience, and considerably less concern about collateral damage than either government usually bothers pretending to have. Cortana's scan confirmed it a half-second later, her voice sharpening with genuine alarm. Chief, I'm cross-referencing transponder ghosts on 2 of those contacts. Partial match to corporate security designs. This isn't a government operation. This is a private military contract. And private contracts don't answer to anyone's rules of engagement but the client's. Vess was already moving, sweeping data crystals from the terminal into a satchel with the practiced speed of someone who had rehearsed evacuation more than once. Whoever posted that bounty didn't just buy mercenaries on NAR Shada's open market, she said. They bought a security contractor with real capability, and they tracked you here faster than I would have believed possible. Which means either our security is compromised, or you were followed more closely than either of us realized. She looked at him, urgency replacing the last of her earlier caution. I don't have a fighting force to offer you, soldier. What I have is a research collective survival on the line, and about 90 seconds before whoever's out there stops being patient. What do you want to do? Chief moved to the chamber's single reinforced door and pressed his palm against the frame, feeling for the vibration of approaching contact through the building's structure. A habit older than his time in this galaxy, older than Mjolnir itself. 90 seconds isn't enough time to evacuate a research collective through a contested market district, he said. You said you don't have a fighting force. You have me. And this building has one entrance worth defending. Get your people and your data out the back. I'll hold the front. Vess hesitated, torn between the researcher's instinct to protect her life's work and the more immediate calculation of lives against artifacts. That fragment in the stasis case. Take it. It's the only proof either of us has that this has happened before. Chief was already moving toward the outer chamber, Mjolnir systems cycling through what remained of his combat readiness. Shield still recovering from the freighter engagement, plating compromised along the left flank, a sidearm that would need to answer for the absence of a proper rifle. Not ideal parameters. Workable ones, if the approaching force underestimated what they were walking into. Cortana, tactical. 4 contacts, converging from the market district's east and south approaches, moving with real fire discipline. This isn't a mercenary rabble, Chief. This is a trained unit. I'm picking up armor signatures consistent with mid-grade combat plating. Better hardware than the bounty hunters on the long odds. If the contractor theory holds, expect coordinated tactics, not opportunistic grabs. A beat, calculation compressing. This building's got one real choke point, the storefront entrance. Everything else is emergency egress too narrow for a squad to use effectively. If you're going to hold this location, that's where you do it. The younger researchers were already moving at Vess's sharp, urgent instructions, sweeping terminals and data crystals into cases with a barely controlled panic of people who had trained for many things, but not, apparently, an active assault on their supposedly secret location. Vess herself lingered a moment longer than strictly safe, watching Chief take up position at the storefront's narrow entry corridor. There's a service tunnel 2 levels down, she said, quick and clipped. It surfaces 3 blocks east near the scrap markets. If you can buy us 5 minutes, we disappear into the Undercity, and this contractor loses every lead they've built to find us. Longer than that, and I don't know what we're asking of you. 5 minutes is fine, Chief said, and meant it with the flat certainty of a man who had held worse ground for longer against worse odds. She left. The outer chamber's lights dimmed as the collective's emergency protocol cycled, and Chief settled into the storefront's entry corridor. Narrow, single approach, defensible in exactly the way the long odds corridor had been, and he allowed himself the brief, grim satisfaction of terrain that favored him for once. The first breach came not through the front door, but through the ceiling, a precision-cutting charge blowing a meter-wide hole in the roof directly above the storefront's main chamber, and Chief's threat assessment updated instantly. This was not a unit that intended to funnel itself through a choke point he'd already anticipated. Someone had studied the building's layout or studied him, closely enough to route around the obvious defensive position. For figures dropped through the breach in rapid succession, rappel lines snapping taut and releasing in the same fluid motion, landing in a spread formation that spoke of real training rather than mercenary improvisation. Their armor was sleek, matte black, unmarked by any faction insignia chiefs still incomplete database could categorize. Corporate anonymity, deliberate and expensive. Target confirmed, one of them said, voice modulated flat through a helmet comm, addressing not chief, but some unseen coordinator. Beginning acquisition protocol. Chief didn't wait for them to finish organizing. He closed the distance to the nearest contractor before the formation could tighten, driving a strike into the man's chest plate that staggered him back into a support column, and used the half-second of confusion that followed to put a second contractor down with a blow to the helmet that dented the visor inward. 2 down before the squad had fired a shot, but the remaining pair had used that same half-second to reposition, and this time the response came coordinated, disciplined, a suppressive volley that forced Chief back behind the cover of an overturned research terminal as bolts scorched the wall where he'd been standing. Shields at 40% and dropping, Cortana reported. Chief, these two aren't panicking. They're adjusting formation like they've drilled against armor targets before. This isn't their first contract against something hard to kill. The bolt fire paused, a reload cycle or a tactical repositioning, and Chief used the gap to vault the terminal, closing on the nearer contractor with a speed that visibly caught the woman off guard despite her evident training. He disarmed her carbine with a strike that shattered its housing, then pressed the advantage before her partner could reposition to support her, ending the engagement with controlled, economical force rather than the kind of overwhelming violence that would have drawn attention he didn't need. The last contractor didn't wait to test his odds against what he'd just watched. He broke for the breach ceiling, rappel line already retracting, calling something urgent into his comm that Cortana's translation matrix caught only fragments of abort. Subject exceeds parameters, requesting extraction. Before he vanished back through the hole he dropped in through, leaving 3 unconscious or disarmed teammates behind. Chief stood amid the wreckage of the collective's outer chamber, systems flagging shields critical, plating integrity dropping toward a threshold that would start compromising mobility if it fell much further. Cortana's voice carried a tightness that hadn't been there before the fight. Chief, that contractor's abort call. Subject exceeds parameters. That's not panic talk. That's someone reporting back to a client with an actual threat assessment protocol, which means whoever's paying for this has done this kind of operation before, methodically, against targets that required careful handling. This wasn't the full effort. This was a probe, and it just told them exactly how much force the next attempt is going to need. He didn't disagree. He moved toward the service tunnel Vess had described, sidearm still in hand, and found the collective's escape route undisturbed. The retreating contractors aboard had bought them the margin they'd needed, whether by design or by the sheer inconvenience of a fight that had gone worse than briefed. Down in the tunnel's dim access corridor, he found Vess and her 2 researchers waiting, tense but unharmed. The stasis case containing the Titanium A fragment clutched against the Mon Calamari woman's chest like something precious. "You're alive," Vess said, and the relief in her voice was genuine, unguarded in a way her earlier academic composure hadn't allowed. "I heard the fighting stop and didn't know which way to read the silence." "They retreated," Chief said. "Not because they lost. Because they learned something and reported." Vess's expression sobered instantly, the momentary relief giving way to renewed calculation. "Then we don't have 5 minutes anymore, soldier. We have however long it takes a professional contractor to relay a threat assessment and requisition heavier assets." She looked at him, and something in her gaze had shifted since the ravine at Nadium, since the storefront's careful first assessment. Something closer to genuine alliance now, forged in the particular way shared danger tends to forge it. "I don't know how to keep you safe in this galaxy, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I know people who might. If you're willing to hear an offer that isn't the Empire's leash or the Republic's chain of command, there's a third option, one you haven't been given yet." Vess led them deeper into the tunnel network, moving with the sure-footed pace of someone who had used these passages before, while Chief kept rearguard, senses tuned for pursuit that Cortana's rearward scan hadn't yet detected. The stasis case bounced gently against the Mon Calamari researcher's chest with each hurried step, and the human man, introduced only in passing as teller, kept glancing back at Chief with a particular wariness of someone still processing what he'd just watched happen to 4 professional contractors in under 90 seconds. The third option, Chief said, once the tunnel widened enough to walk 2 abreast. Explain it. There's a Jedi, Vess said, though calling her that requires some qualification the Order itself wouldn't appreciate. Master Sariando left active council service 4 years ago, not expelled, not disgraced, simply stepped back, in the quiet way senior Jedi sometimes do when they've grown uncomfortable with the distance between the Order's philosophy and the war's actual demands. She operates independently now, out of a converted trading vessel, taking on causes the Council's bureaucracy moves too slowly to address. Refugees, Force-sensitive children the Temple can't safely extract from contested territory. Situations exactly like yours, where institutional caution costs lives while committees deliberate. Cortana's voice was thoughtful in Chief's ear. Independent, unaffiliated with either government's chain of command, but still connected enough to the Jedi Order to have resources and legitimacy when it matters. That's a meaningfully different profile than Kor's Republic Strategic Information Service or Ronatha's Sith Empire chief. Worth hearing out, at minimum. She's not going to offer you an army, Vess continued, and she's not going to offer you a leash, either. What she offers is protection outside official channels and, I suspect, knowing her, genuine interest in helping you find a way home rather than exploiting you as a weapon for either side of this war. I've worked with her collective's research twice before. She's the closest thing to trustworthy that exists in this sector. And given what just happened in my storefront, I think trustworthy is worth more right now than powerful. They emerged from the tunnel network into a cargo bay 3 levels down from the scrap markets Vess had promised, where a modest trading vessel sat berthed among a dozen similarly nondescript ships, the kind of ship built to be forgotten the moment it left visual range. A boarding ramp descended as they approached, and a figure emerged to meet them, a Zabrak woman, younger than Vess, but carrying the same weathered stillness, dressed in unmarked robes that bore no resemblance to the formal vestments chiefs, still forming context associated with Jedi Council imagery. Vess, the woman said, her eyes moving past the researcher to settle on Chief with an attentiveness that felt different from every previous assessment he'd endured today. Less calculating, more genuinely curious, the look of someone reading not just armor and capability, but intent. Word reached me an hour ago that something had torn a hole in this galaxy and landed on Nadium. I didn't expect to be meeting it in a cargo bay under active pursuit. Master Do, Vess said, relief plain in her voice. We need passage, and we need it faster than I'd like to explain in detail right now. Do's attention didn't waver from Chief. I can see that much myself. She studied him a moment longer, head tilting slightly in a gesture that reminded him, with an odd pang of recognition, of Cortana's own habit of processing before speaking. The force around you moves strangely, soldier. Not absent, I want to be clear about that because I suspect others have told you otherwise. But resistant, the way water resists a stone that doesn't belong to the riverbed. You're not untouched by it. You're simply not shaped by it the way everything native to this galaxy is. She extended a hand, not in greeting exactly, but in invitation. I don't know what that means for you yet. I'd like to find out if you're willing to let me try, and I'd like to do it somewhere your pursuers haven't yet thought to look. Cortana's tone carried genuine surprise. Chief, she just offered an actual diagnostic instead of an ultimatum. That's new. What do you want from me? Chief said aloud, flat and direct. The same question he'd have asked any commanding officer offering unexplained assistance. Right now? Nothing beyond honesty about your situation. Do lowered her hand when he didn't take it, unoffended by the caution. Longer term, I won't pretend I'm not curious what your presence means for the war, or for the galaxy generally. But I've spent 4 years watching the Council debate abstractions, while people who needed help waited for permission that never came fast enough. I'm not interested in repeating that mistake with you. If you want passage away from whoever just attacked Vess's collective, I can offer it. If you want help understanding what happened to you, and whether it can be undone, I can offer that too, within the limits of what any of us actually know. What I won't offer is a contract, an oath, or a chain of command. You keep making your own choices. I simply make it easier to survive long enough to make them." Chief weighed against everything the last day had taught him. Ronatha's leash-dressed as opportunity, Kor's honest, but institutionally bounded offer of information. A bounty that had already escalated from opportunistic mercenaries to a trained contractor squad in under 12 hours. Doe's offer carried none of the obvious strings the others had, which made him, by every instinct trained into him across a lifetime of combat, more cautious rather than less. "Cortana," he said subvocal. "Read on her. Honestly, I don't have the sensor package to properly evaluate whatever she is. But everything she said so far has matched what she's done, and that's a rarer combination in this galaxy than I expected going in. I take the offer, Chief, carefully, the way we take every offer. But I take it." He nodded once, the gesture more for himself than for the watching Jedi. "Passage first. Answers after." Doe's expression eased into something that might, on a less careful face, have been called a smile. "That's a fair start." She turned toward the ramp, gesturing them aboard, then paused, glancing back at the cargo bay's entrance with a flicker of something more alert crossing her features. Not alarm exactly, but the particular attentiveness of someone whose senses extended further than ordinary awareness allowed. "We should move quickly, though. I'm sensing considerable disturbance converging on this district, and I don't think it's confined to whoever attacked your collective, Vess. Something larger is beginning to take notice of all this activity, and I'd rather be in hyperspace before it arrives." Behind them, distant but unmistakable, the low tremor of heavy engines began rolling through the docking stack's upper levels. The sound, Chief's combat instincts recognized immediately, of considerably more firepower than a contractor squad's boarding pods, converging on NAR Shada's undercity with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of forces that expected no meaningful resistance to whatever they'd come to collect. The trading vessel, Doe called her Wayfinder, a name that felt earned given the ship's evident history of quiet, unofficial rescues, cleared NAR Shada's gravity well with seconds to spare, the docking stack's upper levels erupting into a chaos of converging engine signatures and hurried civilian evacuation, as whatever force had been approaching finally made its presence known. Cortana scan, captured in the ship's final moments within sensor range, painted a picture that sobered even Doe's careful composure. "Sith Empire warship," Cortana reported, her avatar overlaying the captured sensor ghost across Chief's HUD. "Cruiser class, not a raiding party. Someone escalated this from a bounty contract to a fleet asset in under a day. Whoever wants you, Chief, they've got authority that reaches well past Ronatha's sphere of military offense." Doe's hands tightened fractionally on the Wayfinder's controls as the ship punched into hyperspace, the stars smearing into the familiar tunnel of transit. A cruiser dispatched to a HUD-controlled moon over a single bounty is not a small commitment, she said. That kind of order comes from someone with enough authority to risk a diplomatic incident with the cartel. I don't like what that implies about how seriously the Empire has decided to take you. They emerged from hyperspace 6 hours later at a modest, unlisted waypoint, a rocky moon orbiting a gas giant on the fringe of contested space, chosen, Doe explained, precisely because it appeared on no strategic value assessment either side of the war had bothered compiling. It was meant to be a pause, a chance for Cortana to run proper diagnostics on the compromised shield generator, and for Doe to begin whatever assessment she'd promised. It lasted less than 4 hours before the Wayfinder's comm system lit up with an encrypted Republic distress broadcast, relayed and re-relayed across a dozen frequencies with the particular urgency of a transmission not meant to be ignored. That's a Republic military channel, Doe said, frowning at the readout. Priority coded. Something's happening close enough for the signal to reach us clean. The broadcast, once decoded, resolved into the voice of a woman chief recognized instantly, Lieutenant Kor, though her tone carried none of the careful professionalism from their first meeting, replaced instead by the ragged edge of someone transmitting from the middle of active combat. Any Republic-aligned vessel receiving, this is Strategic Information Service Element Corps. We are pinned at the Velmer evacuation site. Civilian transports are still loading, and we are losing ground fast, requesting any available support, repeat, any available. The transmission cut abruptly, static swallowing whatever came next. Doe's jaw tightened. Velmer, that's a farming settlement 2 systems from here, no strategic value, no garrison worth the name. If the Empire's pushing an offensive that far into contested territory, it's not for the world itself. It's a message. She glanced at Chief, already reading his intent before he'd voiced it. You want to go? She helped us, Chief said. That matters. I'm not arguing against it. I'm simply noting that walking toward a Sith offensive less than a day after a Sith cruiser was dispatched specifically to find you carries a particular kind of risk. Doe was already redirecting the Wayfinder's course as she spoke, hands moving with the fluid economy of someone who had made this exact calculation many times before and arrived, apparently, at the same answer. But you're right that it matters. Hold on. Velmer, when they dropped out of hyperspace above it, was a world already burning. Smoke columns rose from at least 3 settlement clusters, visible even from orbit, and the space above the planet churned with the wreckage of a battle well underway. Republic corvettes trading fire with Sith Empire raiders in a chaotic scrum that left the Wayfinder threading a narrow, dangerous gap to reach the surface unmolested. Doe set them down at the edge of the evacuation site Corps transmission had named, a cluster of transport ships loading desperate civilians under the cover of a thinning Republic defensive line. Chief found Corps at the perimeter, directing fire from a hastily fortified position, her earlier composure fractured into the ragged focus of someone who had been fighting for hours with dwindling resources. She spotted him, and something in her exhausted expression flickered toward genuine relief before discipline reasserted itself. You're supposed to be halfway across the sector by now, she said, ducking as blaster fire scorched the barricade above her head. Not that I'm complaining about the timing. What's the situation? Chief said, already assessing the defensive line with a professional eye thin stretched, holding more through desperation than tactics. Sith raiding force hit us 3 hours ago, bigger than anything Nadium prepared us for. We got maybe 200 civilians still waiting on transport, and the last shuttle can't lift until it's fully loaded, or the Empire's going to strafe anyone left on the ground the moment it clears atmosphere. Cor's voice carried the particular strain of someone doing math she didn't like the answer to. Commands ordered me to hold this line until the shuttle's full manifest confirms. Minimum 40 more minutes. Problem is, my scanners are picking up a second wave inbound heavier than the first, and I don't think we have 40 minutes before this position collapses entirely. A young Republic officer, barely more than a cadet, judging by the unweathered look of him, approached at a crouching run, relaying a message that made Cor's expression harden further. Lieutenant, Fleet Commands, revise the order. They want us to hold the line at all costs until the shuttle's full, no exceptions. Commands decided the political cost of an incomplete evacuation outweighs the tactical risk of holding position. That's not their call to make from orbit, Cor snapped. But the order carried weight she couldn't simply dismiss. She turned back to Chief, and whatever she said next was cut short by a transmission crackling through her comm. A fleet officer's voice, distant and clipped, relaying the same order directly this time, with an addendum that made her go very still. If the position becomes untenable before manifest confirms, Command authorizes triggering the perimeter's demolition charges to slow the Sith advance. Understood that this includes the forward medical tent currently housing non-ambulatory evacuees. Command assesses the tactical value of the delay outweighs projected losses. Confirm and execute if required, Lieutenant. Cor's face drained of color. Chief watched the calculation cross her features, duty against conscience, the weight of an order from a chain of command that outranked her against the reality of what non-ambulatory evacuees meant standing in that medical tent. They want me to sacrifice wounded civilians for a tactical delay, she said, quiet and horrified, more to herself than to Chief. That's the order. No, Chief said. Cor's head snapped toward him. That wasn't a request for your opinion, soldier. That was me processing an order from Republic Fleet Command that I am required to. You're not executing it, Chief said, flat and absolute. The same certainty that had ended a Sith Lord's opening offer and a bounty hunter's negotiation both. I don't serve your command structure. I'm not bound by that order, And I'm not standing here while people who can't walk get left as a delaying tactic. He was already moving toward the medical tent position. Decision made before the sentence had finished. You want to hold the line another 40 minutes without demolition charges, killing your own wounded. I'll buy you the time a different way. But that order doesn't happen. Not while I'm capable of stopping it. Cortana's voice was quiet, freighted with something that wasn't quite surprise, in his ear. Chief, that's a Republic command decision. Interfering with it doesn't just risk this engagement. It puts you in direct defiance of the exact government that's been offering you the most reasonable terms of anyone in this galaxy so far. I know, Chief said, and kept moving. Behind him, Kor stood frozen between an order she'd been trained her entire career to obey and a soldier from another galaxy entirely who had just, without hesitation, told her which choice was the right one. The medical tent sat at the evacuation site's rear perimeter, close enough to the demolition charge markers that Chief could see the detonation packages already wired along the barricade support struts, standard Republic ordnance, enough yield to collapse the position and everyone inside it. He reached the tent in under a minute, Mjolnir's stride eating the distance, while Cortana ran a rapid scan of the interior. 12 non-ambulatory patients, she reported. 3 critical, the rest stable, but immobile. There's a medic inside, human female, doing what she can with field supplies that ran short 2 hours ago. A pause, calculation compressing. Chief, moving 12 immobile patients under fire isn't a solution I can hand you cleanly. This needs more than raw strength. Then we improvise. Inside, the medic, young, exhausted, her uniform stained with the accumulated evidence of hours spent treating wounds she didn't have supplies for, looked up at his entrance with the particular wariness of someone who'd already been told her patients might be sacrificed for the greater tactical picture. If you're here to tell me Command's demolition order stands, I want it on record that I'm not leaving these people. I'm not here for that, Chief said. I'm here to move them. Talk me through who can't be shifted fast. Something in his flat certainty cut through her exhaustion faster than reassurance would have. She pointed out the 3 critical cases. A burn victim stabilized but fragile, an elderly man with a collapsed lung sustained on a field respirator, a child no older than 10 with a leg wound bound in makeshift splints, and Chief began working through the tent's population with the same economical efficiency he brought to every extraction, lifting stretchers 2 at a time. Mjolnir's augmented strength making light work of a burden that would have required for able-bodied soldiers. Outside, the defensive line held under increasing pressure, Kor's voice audible over the general chaos as she redirected fire and relayed status updates to a fleet command that had not, as far as Chief could tell, rescinded its demolition authorization. Cortana kept a running tally of the timeline, each update sharper with urgency. Second waves inbound faster than Kor's estimate, Chief. I count maybe 15 minutes before that position becomes genuinely untenable. And I don't have a read on whether Command's going to wait that long before ordering the charges, regardless of what's still inside this tent. Chief cleared the last of the stable patients on his 4th run, leaving only the burn victim and the child with the leg wound, when the ground shook with an impact close enough to collapse one wall of the tent's canvas structure, dust and debris raining down as the defensive perimeter absorbed a direct hit. The medic staggered, catching herself against a supply crate, and Chief was already moving to shield the 2 remaining patients from the collapsing structure. That was close, Cortana said, tight. Chief, the second wave's here early. Kor's line is under direct assault right now. He gathered the last 2 patients, the child first, cradled with a gentleness that seemed almost incongruous against the scale of his armor, the burn victim second, stretcher balanced with the same careful economy, and moved out through the tent's ruined wall toward the evacuation shuttle, which sat 50 meters distant, engines already cycling for a departure that couldn't wait much longer. The path there was not clear. A squad of Sith Empire troopers had broken through the defensive line's flank, cutting toward the evacuation site's rear with a clear intent of disrupting the shuttle's loading before it could lift. And Chief found himself between the last of the fleeing civilians and 8 armed soldiers, who had no reason to extend caution to an armored figure carrying 2 wounded through open ground. Cortana, I need a path. Working on it, Chief, you're carrying two non-combat capable patients. You can't fight and carry simultaneously without exposing them. He didn't wait for her to finish the calculation. He set the two patients down behind the cover of a collapsed transport crate, positioned himself between them and the advancing squad, and drew his sidearm, the one working weapon that had survived the crash, with the flat, economical readiness of a man who had defended worse ground with less. The first two troopers who rounded the crate's flank went down before they'd registered the threat. Precise shots that Chief's augmented reflexes placed with the economy his UNSC training had drilled into him across years of close-quarters combat. The remaining six adjusted, spreading into a firing arc that would have overwhelmed a lesser combatant. But the geometry of the crate's cover, combined with the desperate calculus of soldiers who understood exactly what he was protecting, gave him an advantage their coordinated fire couldn't fully erase. He held the line for 90 seconds, not glorious, not clean, simply the grinding attrition of a man absorbing fire his shields could barely sustain, buying time in exact, measured increments, while behind him the shuttle's loading ramp cycled through its final boarding sequence. Cortana's voice carried the taut precision of someone counting down variables that all mattered simultaneously. Shields at 15%. Chief. Shuttles reporting full manifest in 20 seconds. You need to disengage the moment that confirms, because you will not survive sustained fire at this rate much longer. The confirmation came with seconds to spare, Kor's voice, ragged but triumphant, cutting across the general comm chatter with the words that mattered most. Manifest confirmed. Shuttles clear to lift. All evacuees aboard. Belay demolition order. Repeat, belay the order. Chief broke from the crates, cover the instant the confirmation landed, sweeping the child and the burned victim back into his arms and covering the last stretch to the shuttle's ramp at a dead run, Mjolnir's shields flickering through their final reserves as scattered fire chased his retreat. He delivered both patients into the arms of the shuttle's onboard medical crew with seconds to spare before the ramp cycled closed, and the vessel's engines screamed toward atmosphere, carrying 200 evacuees away from a battle that had very nearly cost them everything. He turned back toward the collapsing defensive line, where Kor's remaining forces fought a retreat that had shifted in the last several minutes, from desperate holding action to organized withdrawal. The demolition charges never triggered, the medical tent's occupants never sacrificed. An order from Fleet Command quietly, deliberately disobeyed by a lieutenant who had watched an outsider make the choice she hadn't been permitted to make herself. Kor found him at the perimeter's edge as the last Republic elements fell back toward the Wayfinder's borrowed landing zone. Her expression a complicated mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and something more troubled beneath both. "You disobeyed a direct Fleet Command order," she said, not quite an accusation. "So did I, by extension, the moment I let you act instead of enforcing it myself. That's going to have consequences I can't predict, soldier." Command doesn't forgive insubordination gracefully, especially not when it involves an unregistered variable making tactical decisions their chain of command never authorized. "The order was wrong," Chief said. "Consequences don't change that." Kor studied him for a long moment, something in her exhausted expression settling into a kind of clarity she hadn't carried since their first meeting in the ravine. "No," she said finally, "they don't. But I want you to understand something. Because I don't think anyone's said it plainly yet. The Republic isn't the Empire, but it isn't clean either. We fight this war with committees and command structures that sometimes produce exactly the order you just refused. If you're deciding who deserves your trust in this galaxy, don't let today convince you it's a simple answer. Neither side has won." The Wayfinder lifted from Velmer's scorched surface as the last Republic elements disengaged, Doe threading the ship through a debris field of drifting wreckage that marked where the orbital battle had ground toward its uneasy conclusion. Republic corvettes bloodied, but holding. The Sith raiding force withdrawing rather than pressing an advantage that had cost more than its planners had likely budgeted for. Chief stood in the cockpit's rear compartment, running a diagnostic on shields that had bottomed out twice in as many days, while Cortana's assessment painted an increasingly stark picture of the toll this galaxy's war was taking on systems never designed for sustained force-adjacent combat. "Shield generators holding barely," she reported. But I'm seeing cumulative stress on the regulator matrix that I don't love, Chief. Every time we eat a hit from something force-based, the recovery cycle gets marginally worse. If this keeps compounding, we're looking at a hard failure point sooner than I'd like to admit. Fixable. With the right parts and enough time, probably. Neither of which we've had much of since Nadium. Doe, listening from the pilot's seat with the attentiveness she seemed to bring to every conversation, regardless of whether she was directly included in it, spoke without turning. There's a supply cache to systems from here, independent, not aligned with either government, run by contacts I've cultivated over years of operating outside official channels. If your intelligence needs parts, that's the closest reliable source I can offer without walking back into contested territory. She paused, then added quieter. What you did back there. Disobeying a Republic command to save civilians the order would have sacrificed. I want you to know that wasn't a small thing, and I don't think it went unnoticed by anyone watching. It was the right call, Chief said. I agree. That's not why I'm raising it. Doe finally glanced back at him, her expression carrying a weight that hadn't been there before Velmer. Actions like that get noticed by more than grateful lieutenants, soldier. Both the Republic and the Empire are going to recalibrate their assessment of you after today, not just as a capable asset, but as something harder to predict and harder to control. That makes you more valuable to some people and considerably more dangerous to others. I'd be lying if I said I knew which category weighs heavier from here. The answer arrived faster than any of them anticipated. The Wayfinder's comm system flared with an incoming transmission less than an hour into transit. Not encrypted Republic channels this time, but an open, deliberately unshielded broadcast that Cortana flagged immediately as designed to be received rather than intercepted. That's addressed to us specifically, she said, alarm sharpening her tone. Direct hail, no encryption, and the signature, Chief, that's Ronith. Doe's hands tightened on the controls, but she didn't refuse the transmission, and a moment later the cockpit's hollow projector flickered to life with a hooded figure's image. Robes settling into the same unhurried stillness Chief remembered from the ravine. You've been busy, Ronith said, without preamble, his dry voice carrying an edge of something that might have been genuine respect or might have been calculated provocation. Chief couldn't yet tell the difference reliably in this galaxy's social calculus. A contractor squad humbled on NAR Shada. A fleet command order defied to save a medical tent full of civilians who, strategically, meant nothing to the war's outcome. My Empire's intelligence apparatus has spent the last 2 days building quite the profile on you, soldier, and I confess it's more interesting than I anticipated when I offered you a conversation in that ravine. I'm not interested in your assessment, Chief said. No, I imagine you're not. Ronitha's projected image tilted its head, the same calculating gesture from their first meeting. But you should be interested in this. My superiors have grown considerably less patient than I was inclined to be. The bounty that's been chasing you across 3 systems wasn't mine. I want to be clear about that, for whatever my word is worth to you. It came from higher in the sphere hierarchy, from people who read your capabilities as a threat requiring elimination rather than an asset worth cultivating. I argued against that assessment. I was overruled. Cortana's voice was tight in Chief's ear. Chief, if he's telling the truth, that means there's an internal fracture in how the Sith Empire's leadership wants to handle you. That's useful information, assuming it's not itself a manipulation. Why tell me this? Chief said aloud. Because I still believe you'd be a considerable asset to the right cause, and because I'd rather you understood the actual stakes before my superior's patience runs out entirely. Ronitha's tone sharpened, the diplomatic veneer thinning. A Sith Lord named Darth Kravith has been dispatched to personally oversee your capture or elimination, whichever proves more achievable. She does not share my curiosity about what you might become with proper handling. She sees only a variable that has cost the Empire resources and embarrassment, and she intends to close that account decisively. I would not recommend being anywhere she can reach you when she arrives. Where is she? Chief said. Ronitha's projected image studied him for a long moment before answering, and when he spoke again, something in his measured voice carried what might, in a being capable of it, have passed for genuine warning rather than manipulation. Closer than you'd like. She's tracked your associate's ship's signature from Velmar already. The Wayfinder isn't as anonymous as its owner believes. I'd estimate you have perhaps an hour before she's within striking range. And I promise you, soldier, whatever you survived in that ravine was a fraction of what she's capable of. The transmission began to flicker, cutting toward termination. Choose your next move carefully. I don't expect you'll choose my empire. I do hope you survive long enough to choose something. The projection dissolved, leaving the cockpit in tense silence. Doe was already working the controls, expression grim with the calculation of someone recalculating an escape route under a deadline that had just gone from theoretical to acutely real. If he's right about the tracking, she said, then running doesn't solve this. Kravith will simply follow the next signature, and the one after that, until either we lose her cleanly or she catches us mid-transit, which is considerably worse odds than a fight on ground we choose. She glanced at Chief, and the question in her expression didn't need to be spoken aloud. We don't run, Chief said. We pick the ground. Doe's fingers moved across the Wayfinder's console with renewed urgency, pulling up a star chart that filled the cockpit's holoprojector with a web of contested systems. If we're picking ground, she said, it needs to favor us specifically. Terrain that limits what she can bring to bear, not just open space where a Sith Lord with fleet support can simply overwhelm us with numbers. Her finger traced a route through the chart, settling on a heavily industrialized world flagged in Republic tactical orange. Balmora. It's contested territory, but there's a Republic garrison holding the primary manufacturing complex. Hardened defenses, choke point approaches, terrain built by people who spent decades designing it to be difficult to take. If Kravith wants to bring a fleet, she'll have to commit it against a position that isn't just open ground. You're talking about walking into an active siege, Cortana said, her tone carrying equal parts caution and grim calculation. Chief, that's not just picking ground. That's picking a fight that's already someone else's war. It's already my fight, Chief said. She's coming regardless. Better she comes somewhere I choose. Kor's voice crackled through the comm before Doe could respond, the lieutenant having kept an open channel since Velmar, out of what Chief now understood, was less protocol than genuine investment in how this played out. I caught the tail end of that transmission. Ronatha's warning came through on a frequency my equipment happened to be monitoring. Balmora's got a full Republic garrison, Chief, but they're stretched thin, holding the manufacturing sector against Imperial pressure that's been building for weeks. If you bring a Sith Lord's fleet down on that position, you're not choosing neutral ground. You're choosing to drag an entire garrison into your fight. They're already in a fight, Chief said. I'm not asking them to join mine. I'm choosing terrain where I can actually make a difference instead of getting run down in open space. There was a long pause on the comm, and when Kor spoke again, her voice carried the particular weight of someone making a decision that exceeded her authority to make alone. Then you're not doing it without support. I'm requesting attachment to the Balmora garrison, effective immediately. Command can discipline me for the Velmar order after this is over, assuming there's an after. I'd rather stand somewhere useful than wait for the paperwork to catch up with what I already decided back at that medical tent. Doe set their course before Chief could object to the growing complexity of allies accumulating around what had started as a solitary fight. For what it's worth, she said, I don't think you're dragging anyone into anything they haven't already chosen for themselves. That's rather the point of choice, soldier. People get to make their own, the same as you insist on making yours. The Wayfinder dropped out of hyperspace above Balmora 4 hours later, into airspace already thick with the haze of industrial fires and the distant thunder of artillery exchange along the manufacturing sector's northern perimeter. The Republic garrison commander, a grizzled human colonel named Marevtas, who'd clearly weathered enough sieges to have exhausted his capacity for surprise, took one look at Chief's arrival alongside a Jedi and a lieutenant he technically wasn't supposed to have with him, and simply gestured toward the defensive line without demanding explanation. Words already reached me that something's chasing you here, Tass said, voice rough with exhaustion and old smoke. Normally I'd say bringing a Sith Lord's personal attention down on my garrison is the last thing I need. But my scouts confirm a fleet's already moving on this position, regardless. You're not bringing a storm, soldier. You're just telling me which direction it's coming from a few hours before I'd have found out anyway. I'll take intelligence over ignorance any day of this war. Cortana's assessment of the manufacturing complex's defenses, run in the hours before Kravatha's fleet arrived, painted a picture of hard-won but genuine defensibility, layered barricades, prepared fields of fire, a garrison that had clearly rehearsed exactly this scenario more times than any of them wanted to count. It was not, she noted, a position built to withstand a Sith Lord specifically, but it was the best ground available, and Chief spent the intervening hours doing what Mjolnir's tactical systems did best, identifying weak points, reinforcing choke points, and preparing for an engagement that would test every remaining reserve of shield capacity and combat endurance he had left. The fleet arrived at dusk, Balmora's industrial haze turning the sky the color of old rust, as Sith Empire warships began their descent toward the manufacturing sector's perimeter, and at the center of the advancing ground assault, visible even at distance through the smoke and chaos, walked a single-robed figure whose presence alone seemed to make the garrison's defenders instinctively lower their aim. Some ancient instinct recognizing danger no blaster bolt could adequately answer. "That's her," Cortana said quietly, sensor readings spiking in a pattern that mirrored, but exceeded, everything she'd cataloged from Ronith. "Chief, whatever margin we had against him, I don't think it holds against this." Darth Kravath walked through the opening exchange of blaster fire without breaking stride, her presence alone seeming to bend the battlefield's chaos around a singular, inevitable trajectory aimed directly at the one variable her empire had decided could no longer be tolerated to exist. Chief stood at the garrison's forward barricade, watching her approach with the flat, unflinching readiness of a man who had already decided this was the ground he'd chosen, and would not now retreat from it. "Colonel," he said, without turning from the advancing figure, "hold your line. She's not here for your garrison." "No," Tass agreed grimly, already relaying orders to concentrate defensive fire on the conventional assault flanking Kravatha's approach. "She's here for you. Which means for the next few minutes, soldier, you're the only thing standing between her and whatever she intends to do to the rest of us once she's finished with you." Chief didn't answer. He simply watched Darth Kravath close the final distance, robes stirring in a wind that carried the acrid smell of burning industry and the low, building pressure of a power that made even Ronitha's opening gambit in the Nadium ravine feel, in retrospect, like a gentle warning shot. Kravath stopped 20 meters from the barricade, and the battlefield's chaos seemed to recede around her stillness. Blaster fire still crackled along the flanks. Explosions still rocked the manufacturing sector's outer walls. But the immediate space around the Sith Lord had gone quiet in the particular way Chief now recognized as a warning rather than a comfort. "So," she said, voice carrying none of Ronitha's measured curiosity, only flat, professional appraisal. "The variable that's cost my empire a bounty, a contractor contract, and Sphere Commander Ronitha's professional credibility, all in under 3 days. I confess I expected something more imposing." "Cortana," Chief said, subvocal, watching her approach with every combat sense at full alert. "Readings. Off the scale compared to Ronith, Chief. I don't have a clean model for what we're facing. Whatever margin got us through the last fight, I don't think it's enough here." Cortana's tone carried none of her usual dry composure. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this one. This is the hardest fight you've faced since the crash." "You needn't listen to your machine's assessment," Kravath said, and Chief's HUD flagged the statement with genuine alarm. She'd somehow registered Cortana's private transmission, or guessed its content with unsettling precision. "I can feel your intelligence's fear from here. It has good instincts. You should heed them." She raised a hand, and unlike Ronitha's exploratory opening gambit in the ravine, Kravatha's attack came instantaneous and absolute, a wave of force pressure that didn't simply throw Chief backward, but seemed to compress the air itself around him, Mjolnir's shields flaring to full capacity and burning through half their reserve in a single, sustained instant. He held his footing through sheer augmented strength and the desperate bracing of every servo in his armor, but the cost registered immediately across his HUD in cascading amber warnings. "Impressive," Kravath said, genuine surprise flickering across her otherwise controlled expression. "Ronitha's reports undersold your resilience. No matter. Resilience simply means this takes longer, not that it ends differently. The exchange that followed tested every reserve chief had left. He closed distance under sustained telekinetic pressure that fought his every step, Mjolnir's servos screaming against forces with no physical mass to counter. And when he finally reached melee range, Kravith met his strikes with a lightsaber drawn in a single fluid motion. Crimson blade humming with an energy Cortana's sensors flagged as capable of cutting through his armor's plating with contact alone. Chief, that blade will breach Mjolnir if it connects clean, Cortana warned, urgent. You cannot trade hits with that weapon the way you did against Ranatha's bear strikes. He adapted mid-engagement. The same discipline that had carried him through 100 impossible firefights against the Covenant now applied to an enemy whose weapon could end the fight in a single connection, redirecting strikes rather than absorbing them, using Mjolnir's speed to deny her the clean angles her lightsaber needed, turning the engagement into a battle of positioning rather than raw exchange. Kravitha's confidence, so absolute at the fight's opening, began to fray at the edges as the engagement stretched past the swift conclusion she'd clearly anticipated. You fight like something that survived worse than this, she said, breathing harder now, genuine effort showing in her guard for the first time. What galaxy produces a soldier like you? Chief didn't answer. He'd found in the last several exchanges the rhythm of her attacks, the telegraphing pressure that preceded her force strikes, the subtle shift in stance before a lightsaber strike committed fully. And he used that red to close the distance at the exact moment her guard opened, driving a blow into her sword arm that sent the crimson blade spinning from her grip and skittering across the barricade's scorched ground. For one suspended second, the battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Kravith stood disarmed, and Chief stood over her with every advantage the engagement had built toward, and the easy resolution, the kind his training had drilled into him across 100 campaigns, sat within arm's reach. He didn't take it. Stand down, Chief said instead, weapon lowered fractionally, the same flat certainty he'd carried into every choice since the ravine. This doesn't have to end with you dead. Kravith stared at him, something complicated crossing her features, not gratitude, not quite, but the particular disorientation of someone confronting a mercy her worldview had no framework for. You could kill me, she said slowly. Right now. End the Empire's pursuit of you in a single stroke. Remove the greatest immediate threat to your survival. Why would you choose otherwise? Because killing you doesn't end this, Chief said. Someone else takes your place. I'd rather end the reason the Empire's hunting me than the person carrying out the order. Cortana's voice was quiet, almost reverent, in his ear. Chief, I don't know if that's tactically sound, but it might be the most you thing I've watched you do since we crossed over. Kravitha's hand moved, not toward her fallen lightsaber, but raised in a gesture of genuine, startled surrender, the first crack in her composure since she'd walked onto the battlefield. I withdraw, she said, voice rough. Not out of mercy, returned, soldier. Out of recognition that I have no framework for what you just demonstrated, and I would rather retreat to understand it than die failing to. She rose slowly, retrieving her fallen weapon, but making no move to re-engage. This is not over. My empire does not simply forget a variable it has committed this much resource toward eliminating. But I will carry back an assessment they did not expect, and I suspect that changes the calculation more than another dead Sith Lord would have. She withdrew across the smoking battlefield, signaling her remaining forces into an orderly retreat that left the Balmorra garrison, against every expectation Colonel Tass had voiced at the day's outset, holding their ground as the Sith Empire's fleet broke off its assault and climbed back toward orbit. The Sith fleet's withdrawal left Balmorra's manufacturing sector standing, smoke still curling from a dozen scattered fires, but the garrison intact. The line held not through overwhelming force, but through a single choice made on a scorched barricade at the moment it mattered most. Colonel Tass found Chief in the aftermath, surveying the wreckage of the battlefield with the particular exhaustion of a commander who had genuinely not expected to still have a garrison by nightfall. I've fought this war a long time, Tass said, voice rough with smoke and disbelief in equal measure. I've seen Jedi turn back assaults I thought were unwinnable. I've never seen a Sith Lord withdraw from a fight she was clearly favored to win, not because she was beaten, but because she chose to be. You did something to her out there, soldier, and I don't fully understand what. I gave her a choice instead of a death, Chief said. That's all. Kor approached from the garrison's forward position, her uniform scorched and her expression carrying the weight of a lieutenant who had spent the last several days watching an outsider redraw the boundaries of what she'd believed possible in this war. Command's going to want a full report on this engagement, she said. A Sith Lord withdrawing without being defeated outright. That's not a data point they have a category for. Neither, frankly, is you. She studied him for a long moment, something settling behind her tired eyes. For what it's worth, I don't think I'm filing a report that recommends anyone try to control you, Chief. I think I'm filing one that recommends they listen when you say something's wrong. Doe found him last, standing at the barricade's edge as the manufacturing sector's fires burned toward containment, and the first uncertain quiet since Nadium settled over the battlefield. Vess reached out during the engagement, she said, her collectives still analyzing the Titanium A fragment, still building models for whether a controlled crossing back to your galaxy is achievable. It's not a fast answer, soldier. It may not be an answer at all, not for months, possibly years. I know, Chief said. Do you regret it? Doe asked, quiet and genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Everything since the ravine. The bounty, the fight with Ronith, defying fleet command at Velmer, choosing mercy over a clean resolution with Kravith. None of it was the straightforward path home. Chief considered the question with the same deliberate weight he brought to every calculation since the crash. Not the mission he'd have chosen, not the war he'd have picked, but the one he'd found himself standing in regardless, and the choices that had defined how he stood in it. No, he said finally. I didn't choose this galaxy, but I chose what I did in it. That's enough. Cortana's voice, when she spoke, carried a warmth that transcended the clinical precision she usually wore like armor of her own. For what it's worth, Chief, I spent every hour since the crash trying to model this galaxy, its force, its factions, its wars, and I still don't have clean answers for most of it. But I have a working theory now about the one thing that's mattered most through all of it. You didn't need a side in this war to matter. You just needed to keep being exactly who you already were. The galaxy did not stop turning simply because a Spartan had refused an Empire's leash, defied a Republic's flawed order, and shown mercy to a Sith Lord who'd come to kill him. The Great Galactic War ground on, as it had for years before Master Chief fell through a tear in reality, and would continue long after whatever came next for him. But something had shifted in the quiet ledgers both governments kept on threats and assets alike. Darth Ronitha's report to his superiors, tempered now by Kravitha's own unprecedented account of a mercy she still couldn't fully explain, argued for patience over pursuit. Republic Fleet Command's disciplinary proceedings against Lieutenant Kor quietly stalled in committee, no officer willing to formally punish the insubordination that had saved 200 civilians and, by extension, the reputation of an Empire's withdrawal no one in the chain of command wanted examined too closely. On Nar Shaddaa, Vessa's collective continued its patient work. The Titanium A fragment now joined by careful documentation of a second confirmed crossing, proof, however incomplete, that the boundary between galaxies could be crossed, survived, and perhaps, someday, crossed back. Chief remained aboard the Wayfinder, neither Republic soldier nor Imperial asset nor fully independent operator. But something the war's rigid factions had no clean category for, a variable that had entered their galaxy's oldest conflict and, through sheer stubborn insistence on his own judgment, bent it fractionally toward mercy rather than escalation. He did not know, in the weeks that followed, whether a path home would ever fully open. Cortana's ongoing work with Vessa's research remained a project measured in years, not days, its outcome genuinely uncertain. What he knew, with the same flat certainty that had carried him through every impossible choice since the ravine on Nadium, was that he would meet whatever came next the same way he'd met everything so far, not by choosing a banner, but by choosing, each time, what was right in front of him. The Great Galactic War would remember him, in the careful, classified language of both Empire and Republic intelligence services, as an anomaly never fully explained and never fully controlled. But on Balmora's scorched barricade, and in a Velmer medical tent that never fell to its own government's demolition charges, he would be remembered differently, as the soldier from beyond the stars who proved that even in a galaxy bound by the Force, some things mattered more than which side of a war you were born or fallen into. The Great Galactic War did not end on Balmorra. No single engagement, however strange its outcome, was ever going to still the machinery of two empires locked in a struggle that had consumed the galaxy for years before Spartan fell through a tear in reality and would grind on long after. But something in the war's careful calculus had shifted quietly and permanently. In the days following that scorched barricade, a shift measured not in territory won or lost, but in the reluctant recalculation of two governments that had each, in their own way, misjudged exactly what they were dealing with. Darth Ronatha's report to his superiors argued, with uncharacteristic caution for a man who had opened this entire affair with an offer of recruitment, that the Empire's continued pursuit of the anomaly designated only as the Nadium variable carried more risk than reward. His account, filtered through the sphere of military offenses bureaucratic channels, might have been dismissed as the professional embarrassment of a commander who'd twice failed to secure his target, if not for Darth Kravatha's own report, filed independently, which corroborated every uncomfortable detail. A Sith Lord disarmed and shown mercy by an enemy who could have killed her cleanly. A soldier who had fought with skill matching any Force user's raw power, and who had chosen, at the one moment his training and this galaxy's brutal logic both said to finish the engagement, not to. Neither report offered the Empire's leadership a clean category to file the incident under. Pursuit stalled not from mercy, but from institutional uncertainty about what pursuing further might cost. On the Republic side, Lieutenant Vesicor's insubordination at Velmar drifted through disciplinary review with a particular slowness reserved for infractions no officer wanted to examine too closely. 200 evacuees, including 12 non-ambulatory patients who would not have survived a demolition order carried out as written, made poor optics for a fleet command eager to punish the lieutenant who defied it. The order itself quietly vanished from official after-action summaries, replaced by language about tactical adaptation under evolving battlefield conditions that satisfied no one's conscience but preserved everyone's careers. Corps remained in service, transferred rather than court-martialed, and carried forward. In the private observations she shared with no one but the anomaly who'd made her choice possible, a clearer understanding that the war she fought did not always deserve the obedience it demanded. On NAR Shada, Master Vessa's collective continued its patient, underfunded work. The Titanium A fragment now joined by hours of documentation gathered from the one confirmed survivor of a second crossing. Dessa Overhand's original theory, that dimensional bleeds occurred where violence and desperate force use wore the boundary between reality's thinnest, gained new weight from data that had, for the first time, a living subject to test it against. Whether a controlled return crossing could ever be engineered remained genuinely uncertain, a question measured in years of careful research rather than weeks of convenient narrative resolution. Master Chief understood that uncertainty and carried it without complaint, the same way he carried every operational unknown, as a variable to work against, not a verdict to despair over. He remained aboard the Wayfinder, in the loose orbit of Master Seriando's independent operation, neither Republic asset nor Imperial prisoner nor fully unaffiliated wanderer, but something this galaxy's rigid factional logic had no honest category for. He took causes as they came to him, a besieged world here, a stranded refugee convoy there, choosing each engagement on its own terms rather than any banner's demands, and in doing so became, gradually and almost against his own expectation, a known quantity across both sides of a war that had once wanted only to own or erase him. Cortana's ongoing collaboration with Vessa's researchers became its own quiet thread through those following months, an AI built for a war against an alien empire, learning to model an energy field no UNSC database had ever conceived of, working alongside scholars who had spent decades chasing questions their own governments considered fringe superstition. Neither side expected quick answers. Both kept working anyway, because the alternative, accepting that the boundary between galaxies was simply permanently closed, was a conclusion neither Cortana nor Vess was willing to file without exhausting every avenue first. What endured most clearly, In the classified assessments, both Empire and Republic intelligence eventually compiled on the anomaly they could neither fully explain nor fully control. Was not his strength, though that had proven considerable, nor his tactical skill, though it had reshaped two engagements that should have gone very differently. What endured was the pattern of his choices, refusing a leash dressed as opportunity, defying an order dressed as necessity, extending a mercy that cost him a clean resolution, but bought something neither side's war-hardened logic knew how to properly value. He had not chosen this galaxy, its war, or the impossible tear that had thrown him into it. But in every moment since, faced with choices that offered easier paths and worse consequences, he had chosen the harder ground and stood it anyway, not because any banner demanded it of him, but because it was, simply and completely, who he already was, long before he ever fell between the stars.